This one.
Congress shall make no law abridging the freedom of speech or of the press or the right of the people peaceably to assemble.
And this one.
The citizens are guaranteed by law freedom of speech, freedom of the press, freedom of assembly.
See much difference? The first excerpt, of course, is from the First Amendment to the Constitution of the United States. And the second? It is from Article 125 of the Constitution of the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. Two constitutions, two sets of guarantees. One has meant much, perhaps everything, because it was honored by the government it created. The other has meant little, perhaps nothing, because it was not honored by the government it created. We mean to speak to you today of the American press, who it is, what it does, and of something in the air, something going around.
Don't talk to the press, because they will distort everything you say.
The United States Air Force, we were told, posted that notice for prisoners of war returning from Vietnam.
Consumers are being misled about food prices by the big city and the urban press.
So said Earl Butz, the Secretary of Agriculture, on the day he announced the biggest monthly increase in food prices in 20 years. We mean to speak to you today of hostility and suspicion surrounding the press, and to try to suggest how this came to be, in the unwelcome news of an unwelcome age. We mean, too, to recall the words of Judge Learned Hand, who said in 1943,
Right conclusions are more likely to be gathered out of a multitude of tongues than through any kind of authoritative selection. To many, this is and always will be folly, but we have staked upon it our all.
May we for the moment descend from Mount Rushmore to introduce ourselves. With the usual risk of generalization, let us say this about the American press. There are thousands of us. Some of us are quite good in our jobs. Most of us are probably adequate. Some of us are just plain lousy. Nearly all of us wish we were better. Motivation, some of us were attracted by the glamour, the press card that would be entree to everywhere in what used to be a romantic business. Most of us wanted to be where the action is. Most of us were just plain curious. Most of us went to journalism schools. Most of us started in small papers at the knobbly knees of gnarled city editors who brought down the wrath of God for one fact gone astray. One way or another, we became professionals, which means that most of us look somewhat different from most of you. Our ears are bigger, stretched, you might say, by the various sound levels of humbug. Few of us are heroes. Fewer are saints. Most of us are honest. We submit in the ways that most of you are honest. And additionally, in this way. Since most of us went into the business to learn about real people and real events, it follows that most of us wanted to know the truth, the real, not the unreal, as far as the human mind could perceive it. Politics? Among us there are hard hats and soft-headed liberals, also disciples of John Birch and Mao Zedong, Strom Thurmond and Rap Brown, Norman Mailer and Gloria Steinem. True, these come in smaller numbers, but then they do in the country as a whole. Most of the time, most owners of newspapers are Republicans. Most of the time, reporters working for those Republican publishers are Democrats, which is the way management and labor generally have divided most of the time in this century. In a larger sense, it doesn't matter. Publisher or reporter, Republican or Democrat, we are products of our training and our profession, not of our politics. The American press comes in all sizes, small, medium, and large. From the towers of the effete East, westward through the course of empire, to the burgeoning splendor of the opposite shore. And finally, as far from the encrusted enclaves of button-down sophistication as is possible. To the outer edge of raw, rugged reportage, to Nome, Alaska, population 2,834 souls, to the Nome Nugget. Its bias resulted from the heaving permafrost, not from the natty editor and publisher, Albo Gregory. Albro, what are the hot stories in your circulation area?
Well, there's the campaign on to replace the wooden sidewalks on Front Street, and I'm against it, absolutely. Those sidewalks are part of the old gold rush atmosphere. Also, there's that big snow machine race that's coming up starting 65.
And in the sister media, the American press ranges in grandeur and style from the topless towers of torrential television to a fragile finger in Farmlandia. From the big-name nabobs of the nightly news to the hardly household words. From WCBS with its 50,000 watts to WSWW with 150 at the power. WCBS is in New York, WSWW is in Platteville. Platteville? Platteville is in Wisconsin, population 9,615 souls. Platteville has no newspaper, and WSWW is the only station in town. Presiding over this monogamous monopoly are Bob and Mary Bodden. They run what is known in the trade as a mom-and-pop station. Bob Bodden beats the bushes for sponsors and does announcing.
WW and FM, Platteville, the station where chatter is but a whisper.
A very pleasant good morning and welcome to the coffee break. Mary and Bob Bodden dropping in once again on a rather cloudy, damp.
Mary Bodden keeps the books and does women's programs.
You know, Bob, working mothers never seem to have enough time in their day. And I came across these tips that might help. For example, with different spices, herbs, and different meat or fish, you can prepare a curry, a spaghetti, and a chili con carne out of it.
The American press. Is it a monolith? A conspiracy of sameness? A vast interwoven web in which Arthur Ox Sulzberger of the New York Times presses a viewpoint on Albro Gregory of the Nome Nugget? A contagion of opinion wherein David Brinkley of Washington, D.C. transmits the virus to Bob Bodden of Platteville, Wisconsin? Or is it...
He aquí las últimas noticias. Los gobiernos de Venezuela y Bolivia die Regierung der Bundesrepublik Deutschland kündigte heute an, dopo 4 giorni di permanenza a Pechino e 40 ore di...
At the outset, we were just completely ignored until they realized what was happening out in Flatbush, and then they came in later.
Or is it a multitude of tongues? We mean to speak to you today of the service of words. Written words, spoken words. This is what the press does. It endeavors to provide what Walter Lippmann once admonished it to provide, a picture of reality on which man can act. Most of what the press does involves the ordinary, the non-glamorous, non-epic, non-controversial, non-ideological, non-Hollywood basic stuff by which ordinary people get through a day or a week. A service of words. Where are the new sewer lines going? How much higher will my school taxes be? Which intersection gets the traffic light? Are the bus drivers still on strike? Do I need a raincoat today? Is it safe to buy tuna fish? A service of words. A public and private diary, if you please. A clipping in a scrapbook when a daughter is married, when a son scores a touchdown, or his mother gets a fateful telegram from the Defense Department. A service of words, of interlocking interest. The farmer in Iowa needs to know about the failure of the Russian wheat crop. The Datsun dealer in Des Moines needs to know about the dock strike in Seattle. But wait, did the new sewer line contract really go to the lowest bidder? Does the new school budget have to include a heated swimming pool? Did the FDA look the other way when the tainted tuna fish went from supplier to supermarket? Suspiciousness lies deep in the American soil, inevitably very deep in a nation formed by militant refugees escaping the despotism of the old world and forever determined to sniff it out, smell it out, stamp it out in the new. From the beginning, the antennae of this national characteristic has been the American press. This means, in the words of columnist Mike Royko, a reporter is to a politician what a barking dog is to a chicken thief. In 1963, the barking dogs bore such names as Malcolm Brown, David Halberstam, and Neil Sheehan. Because these reporters refused to accept their government's pronouncement at face value, Americans learned that all indeed was not well in a place called Vietnam. The government did not tell the whole truth about Vietnam. The press did. Because reporter Seymour Hersh refused in 1969 to accept the pronouncements of the United States Army, Americans learned that what happened at My Lai was not simply a routine combat operation. The Army did not break the story of My Lai. The press did. Because reporter Gene Miller in 1966 refused to accept even the findings of a court of law, 2 people wrongly convicted of murder are today free. The courts did not discover this injustice. The press did. Over the years, the transient tenants of the White House did not tell us about Teapot Dome or Vicuna coats or deep freezes or wheat deals or Watergate. The press did. The Ku Klux Klan never revealed its dark purposes. The press did. Voting officials did not tell us about phony registrations in St. Louis, Kansas City, and countless other places. The press did. The Department of Labor did not discover the rich hanky-panky in the Teamsters Union. The press did. The Internal Revenue Bureau did not tell us about its occasional bouts with graft. The press did. The bank examiners did not smell something rotten in the state of Billy Saul Estes' books. The press did. The bureaucrats did not slow down the rape of the Kentucky landscape by strip mining. The press did. The august Supreme Court of the United States did not reveal the questionable income of one of its justices. The press did. At the risk of sanctimony and belaboring a point, we cite all this only to suggest that it is not in the nature of institutions or individuals to call attention to their own warts or malignancies. Who then will? Is it pretentious of us also to ask, if the credibility of the press is poisoned, for whatever reason, whom will you then believe? Freedom of the press was never intended as a benefit for the press. Like the rest of the Bill of Rights, it was meant to be a protection for the people, a fundamental barrier against the misuse of power by the government. The intellectuals who wrote the Constitution reasoned that the Constitution itself was not specific enough in its guarantees of liberty, and so they added 10 amendments handed down to us as the Bill of Rights, and in their sense of priority, they put freedom of the press in the First Amendment. They reasoned that the fragile experiment in government they were bringing forth could survive and prosper only if the people were informed. They insisted that it must be the citizen, not his rulers, who must decide what to read and what to believe. This, they felt, was the best antidote to despotism. They set no standards. They knew that standards, once defined, could become restrictive through individual interpretation. So they added no adjectives. They added no clauses. And so it reads, freedom of the press. Not free to be fair or objective or even accurate, but free. Free. Simply free. And so the First Amendment does not prohibit that sly look on David Brinkley's face, or that look of long suffering on Walter Cronkite's. It does not prohibit the heavy or the light hand of satire, or surely Samuel Clemens, H.L. Mencken, and Will Rogers would have died in jail. Freedom of the press. The writers of the Bill of Rights knew that that sweeping phrase would involve burdens. None of it would be easy, but all of it would be necessary. They agreed with Thomas Paine.
Those who expect to reap the blessings of freedom must undergo the fatigue of supporting it.
Thus, democracy makes demands on both citizens and their leaders. Instinctively, reporters want to know more than a sheriff or a mayor or a governor or a president wants to tell. Instinctively, a sheriff or a mayor or a governor or a president wants to tell less. Inevitably, the result is a guerrilla war, undeclared, usually good-humored, and mostly honored by both sides through the years. The battle is especially visible at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, an address intensely sought and won by 36 very mortal men. Richard Nixon is by no means the first tenant to find the press vastly irritating. He's only the most recent. Virtually every president since George Washington has had his apoplectic moments reading what was written about him. Franklin Roosevelt once told a reporter to stand in the corner with a dunce cap. For another, he recommended the German Iron Cross. The fulminations of Lyndon Johnson became monumental, if not printable, and John Kennedy, usually the epitome of urbanity, once became so incensed he ordered the cancellation of the White House subscription to the offending paper. But it was also John Kennedy who said,
even though we never like it, and even though we don't, even though we wish they didn't write it, and even though we disapprove, there still is There isn't any doubt that we couldn't do the job at all in a free society without a very, very active press.
On the federal level, the war between government and press is one of unequal firepower. The government spends nearly $500 million a year and employs thousands of people in public relations, public information, public image making, and public obfuscation. In the executive branch, all of them, all of those people, all of that torrent of information, all of those Xerox machines can be controlled by the White House. A president's personal power to dominate the news is beyond measure. Also, there are 16,238 people in the federal government who are authorized to stamp a top-secret label on information and thus bury it in a file. It is frequently a matter of debate as to what the people have a right to know and what the government has a right to keep secret. Is national security really involved, or is the government merely trying to avoid embarrassment?
Well, Ethel, the paper was wrong again.
It was not, of course, the paper that said the sun would shine. The weatherman said it in the paper. We do not deny that mistakes get into print that are ours, all ours. Mistakes are still made because of competition and the need for speed. We still race on the big ones in the hope of getting it first, but first getting it right. And of course, there are still the garden variety goofs, pedestrian perhaps, but as every city editor knows, hell hath no fury like a woman's born.
Mr. Editor, I want you to know that you spelled my daughter's name wrong in the engagement announcement.
Mistakes. Yes, mistakes. Hardly ideological, but mistakes. The reporter's copy runs a gauntlet of many other eyes. Rewrite men, editors, headline writers, makeup men. Many minds are involved of varying viewpoints. But the common thread through all the stages in the evolution of a news story is a commanding sense of professionalism. Individual bias may exist, and probably does in many newsrooms, but like the individual bias of a judge or a lawyer or a doctor, the newsman's bias must be disciplined by the dictates of his profession. To do less is to risk his conscience and his job. Meanwhile, we take some consolation in the broad variety of our critics, from the shade of a presidential frown and the clippity-clop of a vice presidential alliteration to the mournful lament of the losers. From the young who regard us as spineless tools of the establishment to the lords of the establishment who regard us as suspect troublemakers. From the militant minorities who say we ignore them to the unsettled middle Americans who say we give the minorities too much attention. And finally, to that larger group, to the millions of Americans everywhere who yearn for a gentler time, who find themselves blaming the bad news on the messenger, who think that much of the anarchy in the world would go away if we didn't write about it. With these critics, we may commiserate, but we do not agree. Problems hidden in a closet have a way finally of exploding from the inside with unimaginable fury. For those critics, we recommend a trip to Sao Paulo in Brazil. There, about 11 o'clock every night, a man arrives at the office of O Estado de Sao Paulo, Brazil's largest newspaper. The man's job is to read the proof sheets of all the news that will appear in the paper the next morning. The man is not a proofreader. He is a policeman. He is the official government censor. Like others stationed in newsrooms throughout Brazil, his job is to eliminate news the government feels is, quote, inconvenient, unquote. The reason the government finds certain news inconvenient is that it seeks to promote, quote, stability, unquote, in the country. Stability. Wouldn't we all like a little stability? In Brazil, there is a prescribed list of subjects considered unsuitable for readers. If this were done in our country, you would not be able to read about America's economic situation, housing programs, and stories about drugs, prostitution, homosexuality. All news or commentary of a political nature about the regime. All news, of course, about censorship. And finally, all news the censor finds inconvenient. How convenient, how tranquil life might be if we could be spared all that unsettling news, all in the name of stability. It is an ancient refrain of despots everywhere. The people are not yet ready for freedom. Meanwhile, the government knows what's good for them. Big Brother knows best. When will the people be ready? Are they ready in Russia, say, after 56 years? Apparently not. Stability. What price stability? Through the centuries, governments have come and governments have gone seeking stability with shackles. But on the high and scarred plateau of history, one abstraction, one fragile idea, one noble experiment called the United States of America remains the oldest democracy in the world. A nation whose soul was committed nearly 200 years ago to this proposition.
Right conclusions are more likely to be gathered out of a multitude of tongues than through any kind of authoritative selection. To many this is and always will be folly, but we have staked upon it our all.